And legendary broadcaster Ken Bruce has hit out at the BBC, claiming he felt underappreciated by the broadcaster before his shock departure to Greatest Hits Radio. Speaking out for the first time since ending his 30-year stint on Radio 2 amid an exodus of older presenters, the 72-year-old told the Radio Times that the BBC took him for granted and treated him like an afterthought. He added, "There were times when I felt I wasn't really noticed by either the BBC itself or some listeners, so I thought I'm going to make these people appreciate me." Another victim of the BBC's seemingly ageist approach to its radio lineup was the late, great Paul O'Grady, who acrimoniously left the corporation last summer after being forced to share his Sunday afternoon slot with the comedian almost half his age. O'Grady, who sadly died last week, aged 67, wasn't even given a leaving party by the Beeb, despite his 13 years of service. That's according to his producer, Malcolm Prince, who told the Daily Telegraph that O'Grady was, quote, disappointed at his treatment and believed Radio 2 had changed. But what do you think? Has the woke BBC just destroyed Radio 2? Let me know your thoughts by emailing dan@gbnews.uk, tweet me at gbnews and go and vote in our poll, but to help you make up your mind. Britain's second longest serving female national radio DJ until the BBC axed her too, the brilliant Liz Kershaw, and the broadcaster Bushra Shaikh. So Liz, look, you've been one of the first on this. You must be really shocked and horrified to hear about Paul O'Grady's horror over his treatment just before he died, but also Ken Bruce, you know, who's such a modest bloke, coming out and saying, hang on a moment, they treated me like I was invisible.
Can I just tell you a quick story that came to mind as you're introducing that, Dan? The difference between the way the BBC treated Terry Wogan and Ken Bruce. So one of the many times I was lucky enough to go to the Eurovision Song Contest working for the BBC, and I was part of the official delegation with Terry Wogan and Ken Bruce. Terry Wogan, on one occasion in Sweden, in Stockholm, he had the top floor suite where the likes of Madonna would stay in this hotel. And Ken Bruce had a regular double bedroom like the rest of us. Terry Wogan, we got to the venue and there was only one suite for the BBC. And of course, Terry's trying to do commentary on telly. Ken's doing it on radio. Terry gets the whole suite, and he's got lackeys around him and a bottle of Baileys and everything he could need. Somebody went to the local garden centre and bought a wooden shed, brought it into the suite, erected it, and Ken Bruce was locked in the shed while he did his commentary for radio. And he was like, look at this, Liz. Doesn't that just sum things up?
Doesn't it sum it up? So they've always treated him badly, but the reality is now, Liz, what seems to have happened is that they're going woke at Radio 2. They don't want older DJs. They want to bring in diversity. They seem to be destroying a national institution, a national treasure.
Well, it's established now. I mean, all the evidence has been out there for months now about people being removed simply on the grounds of age. It's a pattern, it's a trend. There's about half a dozen cases in the last 18 months. The thing is that I've heard people say, and I agree to some extent, you know, you can't be there forever. It's not a job for life. I would never have gotten Radio 1 in 1987 if they hadn't retired somebody else. I'd never have gotten local radio 40 years ago if the manager hadn't been told, you've got to get some new young blood in. So I get that. But we have laws in this country. It's a generally accepted belief, morality, that you don't fire people on the grounds of age, as you don't fire them on the grounds of sex or sexual orientation or you know,
race, yeah, exactly. Your immutable characteristics. Indeed. But look, Bushra Shaikh, what fascinates me is you actually agree that the Radio 2 bosses are going woke, that the BBC's going woke, that they're getting rid of all of these legends. But you say that's a good thing, a necessary thing. Why?
It's a necessary thing. Why? Because as a broadcaster and BBC being one of the biggest ones, they have to think about the new audience. And whilst I totally respect Ken Bruce, we have to also consider that perhaps the older generation need to stop gatekeeping. There is an element that we need to bring in new blood, people that have the skills and the talent, who are younger, bring them in and bring a wider audience on. This is necessary for a huge broadcaster. Probably GB News at some stage is going to have to consider that too. This isn't about, it being woke.
GB News is never going woke, Bushra, let me tell you that.
Well, you know what, I mean, when you really think about it, you have to move with the time.
Performance shouldn't matter. experience shouldn't matter. What matters is that you're young or that you're not white. I mean, Liz, can you believe this? I mean, I think Bushra is accurately representing how the BBC thinks, but it's so disturbing, isn't it?
Well, with all respect that's due, the whole premise of what you've just said is based on the false idea that people choose to watch TV or listen to radio based on the age of the presenter, that young people will select a young presenter to listen to and older people. There's absolutely no evidence of that. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary. People choose an expert or somebody
Absolutely.
they like.
Okay, fine, which is expert, which is fine. But we have to consider the relatability of stuff. Young people, I'd probably say between the ages of 30 and 40, like myself, we need to be able to relate to the broadcaster.
Bushra,
the people that commentate.
Everything is made for you young people. Everything these days is made for you youngsters.
It should be.
Could you not just leave one station actually aimed at an older audience? Because isn't the whole point of the British bashing corporation, sorry Liz, I know you're going to hate me calling them that, but that's how I feel about the BBC, but isn't the whole point about the BBC to provide a service that the commercial operators don't?
Correct. And there needs to be an element of that and a space available for that at the BBC, which they do in a very, very good way.
Unless you're old and white, Liz, it seems.
Well, you know, but this is about broadcasting. It's about viewers and audiences.
The thing is that the commercial sector actually, Dan, I agree with what you're saying, you know, they see where the money is. And it's no coincidence that we've now got the likes of Boom Radio, Great British Radio.
Yeah. They're coming for the BBC. They're coming for the BBC, and I think it's a good thing.
Because
being woke isn't a bad thing. Being, you know, this whole idea of being woke is a bad thing.
Just hold up, Bushra.
It's, you know, the over 75s now have to pay the licence fee.
Yeah.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer is telling people off, oh, you can't just retire at 55. That's ruining Britain's productivity and economic growth, keeping the workforce. And the BBC as a law unto itself, it's just clearing people out. I do absolutely agree you've got to refresh things and you've always got to be looking for new talent. But especially in Paul O'Grady's case, what he did on a Sunday afternoon was provide companionship for people.
Absolutely. And the way the BBC treated him was an absolute disgrace just before his death. Couldn't agree more. Thank you for the debate, Liz Kershaw, the BBC, former BBC legend, now a GB News legend, and the broadcaster Bushra Shaikh. But who do you agree with? Has the woke BBC destroyed Radio 2? Barney writes, I only listen to Tony Blackburn and Johnny Walker now. When they are cancelled, I'll get rid of my licence. And I imagine that's probably only a matter of time. Toby on Twitter writes, Radio 2 is still the most popular radio station in this country. Nothing stays the same forever. New talent has to be given a go, and sometimes the one way to do that is to get rid of people who have done the job for a long time. But Sean writes, it was great with Ken Bruce, Steve Wright, Simon Mayo and the late Paul O'Grady. Now it's very woke. So Terry Wogan would turn in his grave right now, and he'd be horrified. And your verdict is now in. It's an overwhelming one. 92% of you agree that the BBC have destroyed Radio 2. Just 8% of you like this woke washing of what used to be the country's favourite station. Not anymore.